Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, all, and welcome. My name is Paul Grogan. I'm the president of the Boston Foundation, and it is a genuine pleasure to see all of you here this morning. I see lots of familiar faces, but I also see that I think we have some people who are here at the foundation perhaps for the first time. And for those, I hope this is the first of many visits. This is part of a program of forums that the Boston Foundation hosts throughout the year, usually 15 to 20 in all, exploring trends, the key challenges and opportunities facing the city and the region. And this is a very interesting time to gather to discuss the topic we're going to discuss today. There's been an awful lot of great economic news in the last few days. The report that there have been striking economic gains, and gains unlike the previous ones that are being somewhat shared across the economic spectrum. Very, very good news. And of course, the news that Massachusetts' unemployment rate at 3.9% is the lowest it's been, I think, in a decade or more. But I think that makes the timing of this really perfect because as we know, despite this recent good news, which we hope continues, we have some profound problems in this region when it comes to workforce. The demographics tell us that key labor shortages, which are upon us already in some industries, are going to be quite severe unless addressed. And of course, we know that there are very, very wide income and wealth gaps. There are thousands and thousands of good-paying jobs available across the Commonwealth that employers cannot fill. And there are folks desperately seeking opportunity and upward mobility. So it's really great to be here to discuss this topic this morning. I think everybody here is pretty familiar with the Boston Foundation, but we are Greater Boston's Community Foundation, a 101-year-old charity that has put close to $2 billion of grant dollars to Greater Boston nonprofits in the illustrious history of the foundation. We are stewards of about $1 billion in philanthropic wealth, and we seek to add to that total because philanthropy has been so crucial to all that is much of what is really great about our community. So welcome, and glad to see you here. The robust attendance here today is a sure sign that this topic is of great and compelling interest. So many business leaders and education and training providers have told us that it is just an absolutely ripe time to have a forum like this. And as we kick it off, it's very important that we recognize our sponsors, and J.P. Morgan Chase and the J.P. Morgan Chase Foundation have just been terrific. And I particularly would like to recognize Dan Curtin, who's the head of Boston and New England's J.P. Morgan Private Bank. Dan, where are you? Thank you. Another guy who couldn't be here this morning, Mark White, the vice chairman, has been also just terrific in building this relationship between the Boston Foundation and J.P. Morgan Chase. And with that in mind, I'd also like to recognize and congratulate our two co-hosts. We're not doing this alone, but we're in partnership with SkillWorks and the Boston Private Industry Council. And we have had a partnership with both those organizations for a very long time. We've been a supporter and a partner of SkillWorks, putting nearly $30 million in public and private investment into that program, which has been nationally recognized and honored repeatedly. It's served more than 5,500 low-income residents in the city, helping them to attain jobs or advance their careers, and help more than 100 employers find talent for jobs in healthcare, biotech, construction, financial services, hospitality, green jobs, and now with today's launch, the expanding into IT tech. Now more than ever, we need such partnerships with the likes of SkillWorks and the Private Industry Council to collectively pursue strategies that create greater access to jobs for students and job seekers, and that develop the most competitive qualified talent for our region's employers. So what can be done? First and foremost is boosting college completion, we believe, which certainly has the attention of this foundation, this city, and state's education leaders. And thanks to the program Success Boston, significant gains in college completion rates for Boston public school graduates are occurring. But we also need to focus on workplace learning opportunities like Learn and Earn, school to career connecting activities, and more internships for both high school and community college students. For our part, the foundation has invested in programs like Resilient Coders, which provides boot camp training for coding that prepares young people for jobs in web development at tech companies here in Boston. Expanding workplace learning will also afford employers new opportunities to scout talent earlier in the pipeline and to start to cultivate their own workforce further upstream, hopefully exposing them to non-traditional pipelines that may lead to greater innovation and global competitiveness. I am looking forward to hearing the research completed by the Economic Advancement Research Institute, which has set the context for today's panel discussion, and I'm very excited that we can host today's official launch of the Greater Boston IT Tech Consortium. So again, thank you all for joining us today, and I look forward to the important discussion that will follow. To get us on our way, it's my pleasure to introduce Yasha Shah, Franklin Hodge. Mayor Walsh appointed Yasha as the city's Chief Information Officer in June of 2014. As CIO in the Department of Innovation and Technology, he leads the city's efforts to enhance online service delivery, empower city employees with effective digital tools, and improve access to technology and the internet for all Boston's neighborhoods. Please welcome Yasha.
Good morning. Thank you, Paul. So on behalf of Mayor Walsh and the Greater Boston IT Tech Consortium, I'd like to express my thanks to SkillWorks, the Boston Foundation, and the PIC for bringing us together today to address the issues of IT talent development, and in particular for focusing on the issues of equity, access, and community building. With me today are other members of the CIO group that the PIC first convened in April. I'd like to acknowledge Don Anderson, Senior Vice President and CIO for the Federal Reserve Bank, Chris Davis, VP of IT Services and Operations at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts, and I believe Brian Shield, VP of IT for the Boston Red Sox, is here as well. So to effectively promote and prepare individuals for the range of opportunities in IT, industry leaders need to step up. We need to offer guidance and champion opportunity. But we can't do this alone. Intermediaries such as the PIC and SkillWorks play an important role organizing communities, disseminating information, and brokering employment opportunities. With PIC and SkillWorks bringing all of us together, we can create more career opportunities for people in IT. For example, this summer, the city's Department of Innovation and Technology, the group that I lead, hosted Caroline, a student at the Boston International Newcomers Academy. This was through the PIC's Tech Apprenticeship Program, a Tech Apprentice Program. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Newcomers Academy, it's a Boston public school for students who have recently arrived in the United States, usually within the last 2 years. And we were amazed by how much she was able to contribute over the summer. She helped advance our work by documenting and mapping locations throughout the city where wireless internet access is freely available, and she provided support for many other projects. At the same time, she learned how to use GIS software, she practiced her English, and she made a formal presentation to the department at the end of the summer. And in addition to being a bright and enthusiastic presence, she was such an asset to us that we have invited her to stay on part-time during the school year. I highlight this example because it illustrates the roles that we can all play, large and small, in promoting IT careers. My team opened up our workplace to host Caroline on a half-day job shadow during the school year and carved out a body of work that was appropriate for her skill level, but also challenged her to grow over the summer. The PIC provided support and connections between the job shadow and the summer job and is communicating Caroline's involvement in the workplace back to the district and so that administrators and teachers are aware of these experiences and can further show students the relevancy of their school-based learning. Caroline is capable of many great things and could potentially choose a career in IT. And there are lots of Carolines in the city. And those of us in positions like me, Brian, Don, Paul, we're excited to bring them into the workplace and show them what could be possible for them. So I invite other IT professionals to get involved in PIC and SkillWorks and just join us in these overall organizing efforts. Boston is justifiably proud of our reputation as a tech industry leader. But both in my work in the public sector and before that in the private sector, I've seen the challenges we face hiring the diverse, skilled workforce that we need. And through the organizations and partnerships represented here today, I know that we can become the leader in growing the qualified, diverse, abundant workforce that our technology sector so desperately needs. So now I would like to introduce Phil Jordan of the Economic Advancement Research Institute. Phil will give us a broader sense of what's happening today in terms of industry talent demand and the development of the workforce to meet that demand. Phil's complete bio is available in your program, but I'd like to add that he brings a unique perspective to this work by focusing on the impact of talent on economic prosperity and sustainable communities, and has a personal passion for identifying solutions that provide expanded opportunities to historically underrepresented populations. Please welcome Phil.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here. That's normally a throwaway phrase, right? We're always supposed to say that I'm excited to be here, but I actually am very excited to be here. That coffee hour, starting at about 5 after 7, people were showing up on a Friday morning, excited, energized, and seemingly totally ready to prove me wrong about all the obstacles we have, because anytime we have one of these events, all of the superstars in the city come out and talk about the amazing things that they're doing to solve some of the obstacles that are perhaps the norm. So I think that many of you in this room are outliers for some of the things that we're going to talk about, and that's exactly who we want here, right? Because you will be the drivers of change. I'd like to thank JP Morgan Chase, the Boston PIC, SkillWorks, the Boston Foundation, not just for funding the research to do some really comprehensive analysis of what's happening here in the city and sponsoring this event, but also for being bold, for saying, hey, we've got some real issues here, and we need to address them, and we're going to address them head on. We're not going to use code. We're not going to talk around issues. We're not going to make everything look rosy if it's not. We want to have an authentic, real, genuine conversation about how we can move it forward. And by moving it forward, we're talking about economic prosperity, a shared economic prosperity through IT employment in our city and our state. The research that we're releasing today that I'm going to talk to you about is actually the first research that we've done in this area on this topic, but it does follow a theme of some other research that we've done in the Bay Area. You're going to hear on the panel shortly from my friend Luther Jackson from the Nova Workforce Investment Board in Silicon Valley. We've been working together for about 7 years on many of the similar issues, and I'd like to thank him for flying in all the way from the West Coast and also for being a thought leader in this space over time. If there's one thing that we can take away that I want you to walk away from this research and this presentation with, is that we often think of working with disadvantaged populations in poor neighborhoods as being a social program to help people. And then if there's an ancillary effect of helping communities, we think that that's also good value. But what we're talking about here today is very clear indication that it is an economic imperative for this region and this sector to do a better job of sourcing and growing talent that exists here today that we're currently not finding. So that's the theme of what I'm going to present to you. The report that you have on your seat here, that this is the cover page on this slide, is the result of quite a bit of research over the last year. It includes information from the Census Bureau, from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, from the State Labor Board. It includes a survey of IT employers all across the state, including those from IT industries, whether developing and implementing IT solutions, to companies in other sectors that are IT intensive, like financial services, where maybe their product is not necessarily IT, but they rely heavily on IT workers. We also did something a little bit new that you don't often see in research reports. We conducted a digital ethnography of real workers in Massachusetts who have IT jobs at various stages in their career to understand the things that move them and motivate them, to understand their backgrounds and the types of things that matter to them most. So that's a little background on what we did. Now I'll just give you the real high-level overview. So it comes as no surprise to anyone here that Massachusetts has an exceptionally high concentration of computer and math jobs. We are one of two kind of very obvious epicenters of activity. There are obviously others, but when you look at Luther's neck of the woods in San Jose, San Francisco, and our neck of the woods here, you see quite a lot of this activity. In fact, all of the occupations listed by the federal sources and the state sources are more concentrated here than they are anywhere else in the country or compared to the national average. So what we find is we have all this opportunity. We have all these jobs, and we have all this growth, and we have a lot of legacy activity and a lot of new activity. But what we find is that there really are critical misalignments in our development of talent and our supply. So some of these that we're going to talk about in the research are insufficient critical thinking, problem solving, analytical skills, as well as a lack of diversity. These things jumped off the page. And so just to give a little context here, it used to be in the world of work, we would think of people having a career ladder, and people were shaped, their skills were in an I. So you would start as an apprentice, you would end as a master, and then that was the end of it, right? And that's how occupations worked. And it still works that way in some occupations. You know, maybe that example of apprenticeship still holds true. Maybe some healthcare occupation still holds true. But as I was speaking to some people before about, oh, there's a strong need for data analysts. Data analysts require very deep content knowledge in multiple areas. An I-shaped employee is not going to have a very easy time being a data analyst because you need deep content knowledge in multiple areas. Overlaying that, you need to learn how to use those various skill sets so that you can actually solve people's problems with those skill sets, which kind of comes across the 10,000 foot. So what we say is that we're moving from an economy of I-shaped employees to an economy that needs a lot of M-shaped employees. This is not really aligned with how we do education and workforce development when you look at Department of Labor programs and Department of Education programs. It's not really consistent with a model that says there's an occupation, create entry-level and mid-level and advanced level skills for that occupation. It's much more disparate than that. So this is, I think, a key theme of importance, that many of the things that are critical now is that we've moved away from many of the rote memorization, high-efficiency, repetitive task-type jobs of the past towards really more jobs that require discerning good information from bad information, locating that information, using those various skill sets to solve real-world problems. Yet we still largely reward in education memorizing facts and regurgitating them on a test. Okay? So that's a significant challenge that we need to face because that is not meeting an industry demand. The diversity in critical thinking and problem solving, the amazing thing about this is we have a lot of talent here, right? We have a lot of talent that we can tap into. And we have a lot of employers who have difficulty finding the right workers. So this doesn't, we have a fertile base of employers that are ready to hire the right folks if we can prepare individuals with the right kinds of skills. So one thing jumped off the page, right? There's a college problem here in Massachusetts and in IT. When we did our research, both talking to employers about who they're hiring, over the last year, tell us about the background of all the IT people you hired, as well as, okay, you're working in IT, tell us about your background, almost everybody had a degree. I mean, we're talking like 80 to 90% across these occupations were degree holders. Now, the interesting thing is only about half of those were IT or computer-related degrees. So a lot of the folks being hired have degrees in a liberal arts discipline, for example, or a science discipline or a business discipline. And then they went and got certification training, maybe did some more specific IT training, and those are folks who are getting hired. So we decided, obviously, to dig into that a little further. What is it that employers think they're getting with that college degree? Because they're obviously not getting IT technical skills. What are they getting? So they are using it as a proxy. So they say, well, they're more likely to know stuff. They're more likely to know stuff that matters to my business. they're more likely to have good polished communication skills. So they can write memos, they can do good emails, they can be part of a team. They had to work in those classes. They've had to manage their way through a college dorm or a college campus. They must have figured some things out along the way, right? This is interesting because actually what we find out is that college doesn't really do a lot of those things, but we can talk about that in a little bit. This is part of the misalignment. The big deficiency, though, that they even admit in their interviews and surveys is that college really is not doing a good job for non-entry-level applicants for those critical thinking, problem-solving, and other non-technical skills like work ethic and attitude. So this is a really interesting finding, and there's actually a very, very good assessment test. It's called the CAT. It was funded by NSF, Tennessee Tech, and others kind of designed this thing. It's got lots of empirical evidence behind it. It's an excellent indicator of critical thinking skills. And it's actually remarkable how little a difference there is between the average college student, whether at community college or four-year university, and attendees and graduates of elite Ivy League colleges in this regard, in critical thinking. College is just not really doing it. We think it is many times, but it's not really doing it. Here, employers are starting to figure it out. They're saying college really isn't getting us there. So here you see, this is kind of for anybody in workforce development who doesn't work with a population with a four-year degree, this slide could be a little bit depressing. Okay, so we see almost 2/3 have a bachelor's degree. When you add in another 26% with a master's or above, we're starting to get into some challenges here, right? We're starting to get into some challenges. When you look at high school equivalency, you're looking about 20%. So obviously there's people who have overlap, right? They have certifications, they have an associate's degree in one discipline, a bachelor's in another. So there's some overlap here, but we're talking about a very highly educated workforce. So interestingly, when we talked to employers and we said, hey, are you having any difficulty finding employers? And they would report, yes, it's all these non-technical things, right? So we can get people who have the certifications and the technical skills, but it's all these other things. What is it that really kind of gets at you? The number one thing was this non-technical skills that include things like work ethic, dependability, and critical thinking. Now, these are broad skill sets, right? Critical thinking and work ethic and dependability are all kind of different things. But what it indicates is what we're not doing in education and training, right? Is that we're so focused on technical aptitude that we're not doing enough to say, and by the way, this is what it's like to work. This is an experience of how you're going, when you show up on the first day of work, this is what your employer is going to expect of you. It's not a classroom anymore. It's a real world. And so there are other things, right? There are obviously industry experience, but I was shocked by the fact that things like critical thinking and work ethic and dependability were more important to them than the technical skills, because they've told us, hey, we can teach that stuff. Give me the right person who's curious, excited, motivated, dependable. I'll get them through a 12-week training program or a 6-month training program, and that'll make me very happy. So again, I'm going to kind of run through these so we can get more to some of the conversation here, make sure I get through everything. As I mentioned here, so knowledge and technical skills required for the job was reported by a little more than half of employers as something that college does well. But boy, that work ethic and attitude, 8.7%, that's a little scary, right? And we're talking about people who often reported that they were hiring from the top echelon of universities, not just here, but all across the country. So this is something for higher ed to really think about, that they do feel as though they're getting some of this knowledge and technical and some of the communication skills, but when it comes to some of the other folks, the other characteristics, I think it's clear we're lagging. So now here's the kind of the big one that when I called Mary Beth when the results came in and we analyzed everything, it was SkillWorks, and I said, well, there's good news and bad news. And she said, well, what's the good news? And I said, well, let me tell you the bad news first, because it's actually the same thing. We've got a lot to talk about, right? We've got an industry that's really heavily focused towards college, and we've got an industry that is largely made up of white men and Asian men, with many fewer opportunities for people of color and for women. And Mary Beth said, well, sounds like it's the right time to talk about this kind of thing. Let's see, is there anything that we can do about it? So there are 4.4 million computer and math occupations in the United States. So this is not just our problem. This is all across the country. Only 9% of those jobs are filled by Black or African Americans, and 7% are Hispanic or Latino origin. That's pretty low, right? That is a troubling statistic, right? That is a troubling statistic because those jobs pay really well. But the abundance of good news in this data is that diversity is even lower across management occupations, right? So as you get into higher paid, greater opportunities for career advancement, we find even lower diversity. And not only are they underrepresented in the data, the empirical data that we look at, when we talk to folks across the industry who are working in the field, women and ethnic minorities felt, first of all, empirically we know that with same or more education experience are earning less than their male non-minority counterparts and less likely to make meaningful career advancement. Okay? Now this is empirically shown, and they know it. They report it. They say, I know this is happening, and I see it happening in the workplace, and I feel it, and I'm living in this space. And by the way, it is not easy from a research perspective to find a large sample of women and ethnic minorities working in IT in Massachusetts, right? That right there, I knew this is a very hard recruitment. That's not good in a state this size. There's a couple of other things, though, of positivity that I said there is positivity here, right? We found actually that things like mentorship, professional networking, and other career navigation activities, and Luther brought some 5 truths of career success that are great handouts I hope you'll take with you. These kinds of things that are taught, learned, and practiced behaviors really aren't that important to these majority workers who are out there, right? So like the white male says, I don't know, mentorship, professional networking, that's not that valuable to me. When we dug into that a little bit, they already have good social networks. They have lots of social capital to spend. Right? They have mentors already. They have informal mentorship networks that they already have, many of them in the industry. I remember we were interviewing somebody at a major company in Silicon Valley, and he was in a big-time job, and we're sitting there chatting with him. And he said, I almost gave up. And then I called my neighbor who I grew up with. His dad was the guy that invented the Y2K patch. And he really helped me through this problem. Okay, do you think that guy needs a formal mentorship program? Right? But what we found actually was that these are really important for women and minorities. People of color, they say, we like this, we want more of this. This matters to us. And they didn't say, we need more women mentors, or we need more people of color mentors. They said, we need more mentors. We don't care what they look like or who they are. We need help navigating. And we don't even care if they're in our company, and many times we don't want them in our company. We'd like them to be people outside of our company because they can really give us broader perspectives of what we can do next and what would be most beneficial to our career. So a lot of these things are kind of these, we use this word social capital a lot in the research, but and networks. And when we did some of the ethnographies both here and in other places, what we found is that people living in low-income communities have fabulous networks. They're some of the strongest networks that exist. People know, especially when it comes to when you have limited resources and there's a network that can help you get more of those resources, those networks are strong. The problem is that those networks are often not connected to the employment opportunities in places like Boston and IT. So that's the key here, right? And there are things we can do, and we're going to talk a lot about that. So again, some pie charts, right? You see again, most are male, right? This doesn't make sense in a place where you have lots more women than 34% in the workplace. So this is an area we can do some work. Again, racial and ethnic minorities. And we used a broader term, so we were more inclusive. We did not focus this only on African Americans, Latinos. The Bureau of Labor Statistics is increasingly moving that way because it's seen as a disadvantaged race or ethnic group. So this is a broader term, and it's only a quarter. This here, again, this looks at the bachelor's degrees and bachelor's degrees of each category. It looks at the annual salary. And so what we find here is really interesting, right? So women actually are, in many cases, much more qualified. They have much higher educational credentials. But look at the wages. Now, here's an interesting point, though, right? So we come out and say, okay, so you're getting paid less, even though you have much more education and experience. but you're also much happier, right, in your job and your role in your career advancement. So this is something interesting. That they reported higher levels of career satisfaction. Not the case with ethnic and racial minorities, right? So they were just as educated, less paid, and slightly more upset about it, or at least more typical to their male counterparts. So we have some keys to success here, and this is where we're going to spend a bulk of our time, because as we talked about it a long time ago, when I left the practice of law and started doing this stuff, I said I don't want to create reports that just sit on a shelf. So I was really excited when I knew that this project was going to be action-oriented. This is the first of many conversations that we're going to have about these issues. But the first is that we do know that higher education, work experience, and on-the-job training are really important for successful career navigation, right? So if you're going to succeed, if you're going to be upwardly mobile, you need these kinds of things. Self-awareness, networking, relationship management, all rated really high. These career navigation skills that we identify, very important by over half of IT professionals. How many of our programs are doing something intentional on self-awareness, or even know what self-awareness is, right? This tells me that if you're not doing this in your program, you're not providing students with a skill that more than half of the people who are successful in this industry say you need, that they're very important. So this is really a key theme here. Not only that, maybe some of you are doing it. How many of you are assessing it, right? Saying, we're doing it, you're doing well, here's your feedback, and we're giving you reward for practicing these activities in your programs. Mentorship, perceived as the greatest obstacle to career development for underrepresented populations in the industry. What does this mean, right? Are we building in formal mentorship programs into all of our activities and our training programs so that when you start a training program, you have someone, either an alumni of that program or a volunteer from industry? Are we connecting people to have those types of meaningful mentorship opportunities? Because right now they're telling us most of them don't, especially people of color say, I don't have any formal mentorship program where I work, and I'd like one. So we have a few recommendations. Okay, first, this one's a little bit tough, okay? Develop career exposure and experience programs that focus on diversity. Why did I add that last piece? I added that last piece because we have lots of exposure and experience programs. But here's the challenge. I was doing a talk in a different sector, in a different city right across the river, and someone came up to me afterwards, a public school teacher, and said, so I have this problem. I have these career exposure programs. I'm taking my low-income, mostly minority students into the laboratories in Cambridge in biotech, and they walk out of there saying, well, I just found a very interesting place, a very interesting job that white people work in, but this isn't for me. And he said, well, I'm a public school teacher. I don't really want to go down this road because I don't know what I'm supposed to say, not supposed to say, everything else, right? This is a tough topic. Well, we need to get serious about this because, by the way, that's the message that's being sent with many of these exposure programs. Here's a great industry that isn't for you. Let's reinforce a narrative that this doesn't make sense for you. And that's a problem, okay? So we need to get serious about it, and we need to empower students at a young age and tell them, hey, we're in this lab. Nobody looks like you. We're going to change that. You're going to change that. Do you like this work? Because you can be here, and we're going to carry them through to be able to do it. Integrate problem solving and critical thinking into all ICT training. If people cannot explain to you exactly how they use the tool to solve a problem at the end of the training program, then they can't explain that to an employer and they're not going to get hired, okay? Because that's what interviews are. Hey, oh, I'm glad that you know, in my field, I'm glad that you know SPSS. What can you do with it? I don't know. That's not very helpful. Not going to get hired, okay? Provide expanded networking and mentorship opportunities. You talked about this a little bit, right? Again, working with Luther in the Bay Area, they've done some really interesting things through their WIB directly and also supporting other programs. And hopefully you can talk a little bit about ProMatch and some of the other activities that you're doing there. But this is really critical. Work with job seekers to showcase their talent. Okay, so this one's really critical, okay? We gave these assessment tests, the Strengths Finder, the Strong Interest Inventory, right? Students took these. Workers who are in entry-level jobs took these. And many of the folks who were from underrepresented populations said to us direct quotes of things like, this test, the results of this test, was the first time in a career setting anyone ever told me I had a strength that mattered in this economy. That's very powerful, right? This is a 25-year-old woman who had never heard that before. These are empowering things. So what we need to do is redesign our thinking. We are not training you for a job that a company owns. We are training you for a career that you own, and you will bring your talent, and they will be lucky to have you. Okay? Now, we got to back that up, right, and make sure we're really giving them good skills. But that's the way to reframe this thinking. Not, sorry, poor person coming through this program, we're going to do the best we can for you. It's, we're going to work on this, and we're not going to allow the donut hole of development, right, which I was talking to somebody earlier, so thank you for that term, where either we're focused on a short term, shine them up and spit them out and get them into a job, any job, right, which is actually valuable, because a lot of the gains that we were talking about in terms of helping people out of poverty is just getting that job. Or we do bridge programs to college. There's a big space in the middle, right? You got that job. You're making $14 or $15 an hour. You're doing great. This is awesome. Let's keep going. Let's see what's next for you. And then finally, we really need to engage employers to explore these non-traditional hiring sources and internship opportunities. So there is talent. We find some of it across the Commonwealth. We don't find a lot of it across the Commonwealth. I can promise you that there are math geniuses sitting in neighborhoods where we are not finding those math geniuses, and they are never reaching their full potential because we haven't found them, okay? That's on us. That's also on employers. You have problems finding people. You're looking for a certain type of worker who brings certain experience. You say you want a more diverse workforce. We're here, right? It's time. So I think I'm just about out of time. Do I have time for a couple of questions? A couple of questions? Okay. Yes.
Do not produce the student, the employees that they want. Because just because a parent can afford to pay money so their child can cram on the SAT and get 1,200 and go to a college doesn't necessarily mean that the person is highly intelligent. It means that you can cram and absorb information. Now we're talking about, I don't like to use black. I'm going to say disadvantaged, because I live in South Boston and I see a lot of poor people, and they're not all black and Latino and Hispanic. So here's one of the things that I want to say to you, and I wrote it down. We, on one hand, say we want people to get jobs and to be diverse, but on the other hand, when we go outside, we support policies that are contrary to this. So we will vote for people who say that we don't want to provide money for early education. We don't want to provide money for a Head Start. We do not want to provide money for free childcare, so the parents can go to work, the children can get a good education. We don't want to do that. We do not want to support immigration policies that will allow people to come out of the shadows, because I, for one, and I'm saying it right now, I am undocumented. My son got his green card last year. My sister got her green card. I don't have my green card, but I have a college degree. Can I work in Massachusetts? No. So we will support the policies of the people who say that however thousands of people in Massachusetts right now have skills, cannot work. We assume that they will be deported. No, they will not. We have people right here, doctors who are driving taxis, people like me, a trained journalist, I cannot work, and yet still we will go and vote for the people who say deport them, and then we come here and we say that we want skilled labor. So we have to not be able to, we want to give on one hand and take away on the other hand, and as you can hear in my voice, I'm very passionate, and you have to look at this. No, seriously, you have to look at that. You cannot have a policy that says one thing and then come here and then pretend you want to do another thing.
Well, and I think that's very interesting points. And your points are actually linked, and this is something that we see very often, and that is that people, when they're hiring others, hire people who are like them. So, well, I went to university, and I crammed for my SAT, and I'm good. And if you tell me there's another thing that's better, then that's almost a reflection that what I did wasn't right. So what's the easy thing to do? Just thinking about human beings in the hiring process. And it's similar things with some of the other policies you're talking about. Well, I didn't need that, so that's not the way that it works. So I do think in order for us to address all of those issues that you're talking about, it does require us to take a step out and say, there's lots of ways to do it, right? And if we only focus on the one way, that really the data show it's pretty much one way that we're doing it, with few exceptions, we're going to continue to have talent shortages. We're going to continue to have many of the problems that you suggested, and it will limit our economic growth. And that's, I think, a key question, because this is an economic question.
We have time for one more question, and then we're going to roll Phil into the panel, so after the panel, you guys can ask a million more questions.
I don't really have a question. I have another comment, and it gets back to policy, but from a different perspective. I think... Oh, it's on. I'm just not holding it right. But thank you, Deborah. So my thing is that if we're talking about colleges are not teaching the problem-solving skills, the critical thinking skills, the et cetera, we're looking in the wrong place. Because we should be looking at the early education and care community. And that's where we need to be starting those skills. We need to be employers need to be supporting high quality early education and care, not only to support their employees, but also to support future employees. So if we have high quality early education and care, then we look at our policies for the K through 12 system. So instead of supporting policies that promote rote learning, rote thinking, learning our ABCs, 1, 2, 3s, making such a score on the MCAS, we're making a mistake there too, because we're not teaching critical thinking skills, problem solving skills, and social competency skills. So, and if we are teaching those skills, one more comment, if we are teaching those skills, by the time they get to college, colleges can really look at teaching the content and teaching the technical skills that are needed.
Oh.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mary Beth Campbell. I'm the Executive Director of SkillWorks, and I have the distinct honor of introducing our moderator. Before I do that and before we launch into the panel, I just want to remind everyone that this is a short morning. We're going to have this is our first of 3 forums, so hopefully we'll have lots of conversation and discussion. I just want to encourage people to direct questions to the panel, and we can have lots of conversation and ideas and comments after. We'll have plenty of time for networking after this event too. So without further ado, his full bio is in your packet in front of you, but I want to introduce a good friend to SkillWorks and a good friend to Boston and to the work that he does here, Rainier Moquette, who is the CEO and managing partner of Advocate Technology Group, a Cambridge-based technology firm here that does really cool work that you should look into. But more importantly, Rainier is the type of employer in the community engagement persona that really actually personifies the work that we're talking about here today. He's deep into the work of creating diversity through both he co-founded the Latino STEM Alliance and recently co-founded the Diversity IT Alliance. He has a terrific story on his own in terms of how he got to the point in his life and career where he is, and I encourage you to ask him about that. But I just want you to know that our moderator today is the exact kind of person that we love to engage and be a leader and champion of this work, and we're really proud and very honored to have him here today to lead the panel. So while Rainier comes up, I'm going to ask all of our panelists to join us up here as well.
Good morning, everyone. All right, awesome. Well, first of all, Phil, thank you. Every time it is not only is the data continuously eye-opening, but the passion with which you communicate the message, really motivates us to continue working on this. So again, the goal for us this morning is to just have a brief conversation around the topics that Phil covered. Yet before we do that, I was hoping to give each of the panelists an opportunity to give a quick introduction of themselves. That way you can get some further context on their perspective. So I don't, Trish, maybe on that side?
Sure. Hi, Trish Terrizzo. I'm with Charles River Laboratories. I've worked in the greater Boston area for more than 20 years, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Melissa James, and I'm CEO of the Tech Connection, where we help diverse technical talent find new jobs in tech. I used to be a recruiter at Google, and then I started my firm 2 years ago. I'm also the founder of the Black Tech Boston Meetup, where we help increase awareness about job opportunities at different tech companies.
Good morning. I'm Luther Jackson from the Nova Workforce Investment Board in beautiful Sunnyvale, California, heart of Silicon Valley. We've been spending a lot of time working with our partner Phil, trying to figure out what is the tech career success formula and how to apply that formula to diverse populations. Phil mentioned the brochure. We did the 5 Truths of Career Success. This started life as a 20-page research paper that my boss made me shrink, so here it is.
Good morning. I'm Sarah Ayers-Steinberg with JP Morgan Chase, and I manage our philanthropic investments in workforce initiatives with a particular focus on sectors where employers are struggling to find the skilled workers that they need. So I've done a lot of work around developing a strong tech talent pipeline.
Thank you. And as Mary Beth mentioned, my name is Rainier Moquette. I'm the CEO for Advocate Technology Group. We're an IT consulting and managed services company focused around cloud computing and cybersecurity. I'm also the co-founder for Latino STEM Alliance, which is a nonprofit based in Boston. We teach kids how to build robots, and the goal is to inspire them to pursue careers in science, technology, engineering, and math. And lastly, over the past year, we have founded the Diversity IT Network, which is a community of multicultural technology professionals that come together with the goal of supporting each other for career growth and professional development. So with that in mind, one of the first things that I wanted to throw out to the panel was just get their general reactions on the research that we heard, and what your perspectives are and some of the solutions that we can bring to the table.
I gave mine
Start.
already.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm happy to start. I think, I don't know about anybody else, but I don't think there was anything in there tremendously surprising. But it's good to have that research and to see the summary and to really springboard the conversation. As an employer, and I didn't mention what my role is at Charles River, but I'm the divisional chief information officer there. So I've worked in the IT sector for quite some time. From an employer's perspective, and as we're partnering with other companies and educators, I think we as employers have to take that data and we have to change our thinking. And a lot of what Phil was thinking. So for the way I'm thinking about things, we have to be brave, we have to be bold, and we have to really step out. It's a paradigm shift in thinking in terms of how we go and recruit. To Phil's point earlier, people look for things that look like them. And I think Phil did a great job of talking about what people say somebody doesn't need, but often I think people say, well, I needed a 4-year degree to get a job, therefore anybody I hire must have a 4-year degree before, to get a job here. So we have to kind of shatter that thinking, and as an employer, that's something that I'm trying to drive in our organization.
Phil, thank you so much for your research. I feel like you have been following my whole life because that's exactly what I experienced as I went through it. My career started when I was working at a small startup as a spin out from MIT, and I was their office manager recruiting and looking for new talent. And of course, I was the only Black female on my team, and I was employee number 7 and later grew the team to 30, and I was in charge of hiring. So I had a very large focus on diversity recruiting, and everything you mentioned is everything I saw. And then I went off and worked at Google, and I saw saw the same exact thing over and over again. So I realized it wasn't just at small companies, it was at large companies. How do we fix this problem? And I realized that staying at one company, that's not really where I can have an effective role. I've now seen it from being the candidate, interviewing, going through the job process, and then also being the employer who's also looking at like resumes, trying to figure out what's the right talent. So for me, it's like you're bringing all of my worlds together in one research paper, so thank you, I appreciate that. And I think, you know, for so often I have so many great conversations with lovely employers that are working on technology problems and virtual realities, augmented realities. They're thinking about really difficult things that are so cool and really interesting. But when it comes to workforce development, for some reason, it's always put to the back burner. And when I think about like how creative we are when it comes to thinking about technology, we need to be equally as creative when we think about workforce development solutions. So I appreciate your insight, and I think this is a very poignant time for us to have this conversation because there's so much work that needs to be done, and I think for a very long time we've ignored this problem.
Well, Phil, great job, as usual. I have very high expectations of you, and you always meet them, so that's great. I just wanted to point out that what we're talking about here is a really big mountain, this talent imperative issue. And I like to think that all of us are here really motivated by a sense of economic patriotism. Because talent is what fuels our economy. And if we don't get this talent and this diverse talent, the engine comes to a halt. Stephen Case from ALL talked about this current cycle we're in economically. It's a global battle for global talent, and we don't do a great job with talent. We tend to squander it. And a couple of examples, 62 years after Brown versus Board of Education, we're all very complacent about racial segregation in this country. And what that does is that just removes people from it disconnects people from the economic mainstream. And that's really critical to us. My concern is basically that we have a Jetsons economy and a Downton Abbey society, and that's not sustainable.
So this was a great report, really excellent research. There were three things that jumped out to me, and they all point in the same direction. And the first thing is just that the biggest challenge is the lack of relevant work experience. Didn't necessarily expect to see that. The second is just that, you know, how well this report articulated the weakness of using a four-year degree as a proxy, which is something that I've always suspected, but I've never seen it laid out quite so clearly why it's such a weak proxy. And the third, which is something that Phil emphasized this morning, is just the importance of mentorship. And all of these things pointed me towards something that we're really excited about and have a number of investments in, which is apprenticeship, which is not something that you typically think of when you think of, you know, a sector like IT, but is increasingly something that is used by many other industrialized countries to build a skilled workforce of tech workers, and something that we're looking at more in the U.S.
Thank you. No, Sarah, one of the questions that I had, from an employer perspective, one of the things that I've found is that many a times these types of workforce development initiatives come out of a CSR budget, a corporate social responsibility budget. And I've always wondered, why is it that corporations are not perceiving this more of a human capital supply chain issue? So what can we do to change that perspective so that we can increase the dollars and that employers can now take the future into their own hands, if you will, by making the right investments?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So first of all, I will say, you know, employers spend the most money on training of anyone. So what the private sector invests in training its workers outpaces, you know, federal and government investments by many orders of magnitude. And the problem there is that what employers are spending on workforce is generally aimed at the higher skilled, higher compensated workers. So there's been a decrease in investment in low and middle skilled workers to kind of build those career pathways so that people can move up. I think, you know, what a good starting point is when you really have talent shortages. So, you know, and if you look at the tech sector, right? I think it is moving out of corporate responsibility and into, there's really a business imperative to build a strong and diverse talent pipeline. And that's one, because we are seeing difficulty hiring for positions, and two, the increasing body of evidence that having a diverse workforce makes you a more productive, better performing company. So I do think we're moving in that direction, and certainly there's an interest from the business side and a recognition that this is a business imperative, but on the whole we aren't doing it so well.
If I could just add to that, I do think that one of the problems we have here regionally is that there is a narrative that runs through economic development that companies are born here but they don't grow up here, right? So that you have these innovators and then they move to a low-cost place and they manufacture their goods in that place. Well, the economy has changed, right? The Jetsons economy that Luther refers to really has changed it, right? And so our greatest fuel is that talent. So GE moving from Hartford to Boston is a huge deal, right? Because what they're saying is, all right, well, maybe we weren't born here, and maybe we didn't grow up here, but you know what? We're not going to grow old here either, because you're going to keep feeding us with young, hungry talent that's going to keep coming in, and we can attract it here, and we can grow here. The Pfizer example, they lost like 90% of their workforce over the last 15 years. 2 offices have grown in the US, La Jolla and Cambridge. Probably the 2 most expensive places they have offices in the whole world. Why are they there? They closed New London, they closed Ann Arbor. They couldn't get people, the talent, to live there and stay there. So the world has changed. Companies are starting to come along, but not totally, and economic developers need to come along to say, this is no longer corporate social responsibility. This is no longer kind of how do we kind of do the right thing here. This is, if we don't get the talent in the door, we will move to where the talent is. And so I think that is a shift that's happening, and it needs to be, companies and economic developers really need to wake up to that reality.
I'd like to speak a little, too, about the corporate social responsibility issue. One of the things we try to do, and obviously working with industry is critical. If we don't have industry partners, particularly with the speed of change, we're not going anywhere. But I've started to try to be a little bold, and when we talk to companies, to sort of interview them a bit and asking, why are you in this work? Why are you investing in this training? And if I hear corporate social responsibility, I'm less interested because it's not sustainable. I want to hear them say, oh, this is critical. This is part of our future. That's what we need. And that group of companies that you work with, it may be like a small population to start, but one of the phrases that we're starting to use out in San Jose is we want to have this idea of a coalition of the willing, borrowed from George W. Bush, that we'll start with the companies that get it, that really come with a hunger and say, we have to get that talent, and we're engaging middle school students or high school students, not because it makes us look great, because this is the future. And those are the people that we want to invest in as a workforce investment board to move forward.
I'd like to add to that. I think there's the companies that know they want that, but then they get stuck. And we need to find a way to pull them through. So they recognize the imperative, the criticality for their survival. And I'll say, coming from different companies, they are kind of tied in with their HR group, their internal recruiting group that may not have reached out to pull through. And if we could find a way to reach in and create that type of way to engage them, I think that would be significant for many companies.
Thank you.
Can I add to that? Sorry, Rainier.
Absolutely.
I think this is actually very poignant because it's extremely important for employers to work together with their HR teams, with the chief diversity officer to come up with a solution. I only know of one company, and they are so near and dear to my heart, who's actually done this very well. Akamai Technologies over in Cambridge just recently appointed their chief diversity officer, Anthony Williams. They are a partner of ours that we work with, and they recently launched a program called the Akamai Technical Academy. And what was interesting about this program is that they specifically looked for underrepresented talent that had no background in STEM. So all they wanted was someone that had a bachelor's degree and a 3.0, and they said, Melissa, oh my gosh, we want to find this diverse talent. We're having a difficult time. A huge tech company, 30 years old, very smart and talented people, and they came to the Tech Connection because they knew that we would have that pipeline of candidates that were interested in being a part of the tech community, but just didn't know how best to get there. So as we went through this process, we learned so much. One, they were looking for just 24 applicants. We had over 550 applicants that were interested in this program. We had to narrow it down to 300 and then continue to kind of go through this process of finding the best 24 to go through it. But when you do work together, you're able to produce this really great talent pool that has been dying to get into tech for so long, but looking for the best ways for it to work. And how the program actually works is that they do 4 months of training on site at Akamai, learning from Akamai engineers exactly what they need in order for them to get the job. They do a 6-month internship, and then they convert over to full-time hires. This is the most game-changing thing I've seen any employer do, and very bold in their steps and what they're looking to produce. And I think that it's definitely possible. It's just really deciding on how much do we want to invest in this, and how can we get to these solutions quicker. In a 10-month time span, we're coming up with effective solutions for our hiring problems right now. And I think there's definitely ways that we can do that.
Thank you. Now, Luther, on your side, with the work that you've been doing, historically, what kind of access points have you seen between candidates of color and employers, and why are those points of connection not working?
Well, Phil mentioned it. I mean, we'd like to think we're a meritocracy, but we end up being kind of a mirror-tocracy, right? And part of that is, so I have a friend who's a mechanical engineer out in Silicon Valley, and he went to the University of Arizona, and one of the things he loves to do every year is go recruiting at his school, right? And when he does that, I mean, first of all, the company trusts that because they got my friend, they bought him in. But when he gets people who are, quote, like him, that's sort of validating. I mean, this is core human stuff, right? That, you know, it validates, oh, I was good, I'll find someone like me. So that's a real challenge. Again, I think the issue is finding people that get it. We are working with some programs where we're trying to move the ball a bit. We have a partnership. We've had a partnership with the Stride Center, which does a great job of getting folks, extremely low-income folks, high unemployment rates, folks of color, getting them entry-level positions in tech. And our focus there has been, that's great that they're doing computer repair work, but let's see, but the problem is, particularly in Silicon Valley and Boston, is if all you're doing is training for entry level, no company wants to keep entry-level workers in a high-cost area. They just don't. You have to have a career focus. So what we did with the Stride Center was we worked with them to put together a career navigation curriculum. So while the students are learning about the basics of CompTIA A+ basics, they're also learning about career navigation. So that's one, and trying to set up a network. So it's slow going, it really is. But there are some cases, and we've heard, you know, when we interview companies, we've heard people say the right things. We're in this for the right reasons because we need to increase the talent pipeline. And diverse perspectives are important. I mean, one of the challenges of getting all your folks from the same schools, whether it's MIT or Stanford or wherever, it's really easy to get into groupthink. And groupthink and innovation don't go together. So if we're really an innovation economy, we really have to think, that's another reason for diversity.
Thank you for that. Now, Trish, from your perspective, as someone who's currently in a technology leadership position, and you have been for quite a while, what do you feel is the role of the CIO in building the IT pipeline?
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the word pipeline. I think that's key. Again, it's about being bold. If you walk into a company or you have a leadership role and you just go with the way it's going, nothing clearly is going to change. So you've got to be the change agent. Many companies don't have diversity officers. It just doesn't exist. You have an HR, global HR person, and then depending on the company you work in, they might, occasionally somebody will run some numbers and say, uh-oh, looks like we have a problem. And they'll drive toward that, but that's not, you know, looking at it from the right angle or through the right lens. So you've got to run your own HR. You've got to run your own, you know, set your own objectives in terms of what you're trying to achieve from a diversity standpoint and from all angles of diversity, you know, all elements of the demographics of that, and set your own targets. Create your pipeline, a meaningful pipeline that you can explain to yourself organization, to the departments around you, and then kind of drive to that when you think about creating the pipeline, pulling from different communities, different cultures, different demographics in terms of years of experience. And we've actually done that. That was where a previous employer, that's where we actually, it was a whiteboard exercise to create that pipeline, create the strategy around the pipeline, thinking about what we want to be in 10 years. So it's not thinking about what you want to be in, next year, what you need now to do the projects or the programs or support your business. It's really, what do you want your organization to look like 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now? And that should tell you each and every open position you have, who specifically you should be filling it with. And so that's kind of one of the ways I say, kind of take it and own it yourself. Don't expect somebody else in another department to do it for you.
Now, staying with that topic, from a practitioner's perspective, and thinking about it from a short-term standpoint, what would you say that CIOs can do to influence hiring managers who, at the end of the day, it's where the rubber meets the road, right? Because from a leadership perspective, you're not interviewing everyone that comes into your team. So what can hiring managers do to influence, what can CIOs do to influence hiring managers to consider non-traditional
and
talent?
that was the bold part I said before. So without explaining what bold meant, I say give people targets. There's an influence, and you can hint around. I think you used the word the code, dropping words or hinting, but I think the one way to ensure it is to give people targets. We had targets through the Year Up program. We had target, to bring in the non-traditional candidates into our workforce. I think, so there's be bold and define what it is you're expecting people to fill seats with. Which in some cases, I'll say in the old days, like 3 years ago, people would tell you, oh, you can't say that, you can't do that, you can't reserve a seat, you can't reserve a director seat for a woman, or you can't reserve this seat. But if you don't do that, the majority, when you look at resumes that naturally flow in, if you use that as your population without directing recruiters of what you want them to go fishing for, you're going to end up with the organization, the same thing that you have today in 10 years. So I think you have to be directive in that. I would say also, as your other role, other than being bold and being directive or prescriptive, is making allowances from the financial perspective. So bringing in young talent or new talent, fresh talent without the 4-year degree to create even more than internships, apprenticeships. The habit is, I have an open position and I need somebody who's 10 years experience because I don't want to have to train and I don't want to have to wait for development. We need to allow for that in our budgets. So our financials, we need to have wrappers around that will allow that type of growth for the future.
Thank you for that. Now, Melissa, as a recruiter, I'm sure you've found some challenges when you have a Black or Latino candidate whom has a very different life experience than going in to meet with a white male hiring manager, which is usually the case. How do you overcome that? Talking from the perspective that both Phil and Luther made around, we tend to hire what's most familiar to us. Mm-hmm. Now you've got a candidate and a hiring manager whom very often have little in common. How do we overcome that?
That's a great question, and this is something that we spend a lot of time working on at the Tech Connection, where we work with our candidates to help them really understand a lot of their personal strengths when they're going into the interview process, so they can have that vote of confidence. Like, we literally cheerlead with them to say, like, you're really smart, you're really talented, you've gotten this interview. Now let's figure out, what are you going to talk about when you come into this interview? What are the questions that you're going to ask, so that you can show that you have your domain expertise, that you have thought about this interview before you walked in. For so many candidates, this is so new to them. And I know this because I felt this when I walked through it. I was new to walking into Google, trying to figure out, like, what are the right things to say? Am I saying smart things? Do they think I'm cool? I'm not really sure. All of these things were like going through my head. So when we work with our candidates, we literally prepare them for, you're gonna walk in, you're gonna meet the receptionist first. The next person that you're gonna meet is likely it's gonna be someone that's gonna be on your team. They're gonna probably be focusing on one area of the business, not everything. When you meet with your manager, they're curious to learn more about your business acumen. When you talk about business acumen, here are a couple of questions that you should think about, or questions that you might wanna ask your hiring manager. We've seen this show before, so I think when we go and we talk with our candidates, we say, like, these are the things that you need to be mindful of and how best for you to prepare. We also help them think about how are you going to answer your questions. I think you're absolutely right that when candidates go into the interview process, they want to tell you everything, right? They're so excited that they actually made it here. They're like, oh my God, let me just tell you everything, and I hope that you'll just hire me and it'll be fine. That's actually not what the employer wants to hear. They're looking for a very specific answer. They want to know the situation that you were in, the task that you had to accomplish, the action steps that you took, and the results that you achieved. We call it STAR, you're a star, so go through this process and think about this as you answer your question. So we literally make them write down, like, this is how you're going to answer your questions so that you know exactly what you're gonna say when a question comes up. And we can almost anticipate what an employer is gonna ask. Tell me about a difficult time where you had to overcome an obstacle. Great, tell them about an experience that you had when you had an internship, when you worked at the student group. So really help candidates to think strategically before going into the interview. The interview, I say all the time, is prime time. There's a lot of preseason work that needs to happen before that. So we really help our candidates to think strategically about how do you interview well, and I swear to you not, it works all the time. I've had so many candidates come to the Tech Connection struggling to get through their interview process, and they're like, Melissa, I don't know what's happening. They kind of like me. I'm getting to second round interviews, and then they just drop off. I can't find the recruiter afterwards. After we go through this process with them, they almost always get an offer letter.
Now,
One of the key things right here, just real quickly on this, on both of those comments, on being bold and on kind of focusing on people's strengths. Sometimes you realize that your best intentions actually don't have the desired effect. And so when we initiated the Stride 2.0 program on career navigation, we followed up with an ethnography. San Jose State did an ethnography. And we got a lot of good feedback, and we got some other feedback too. That was basically, these are mostly, I think it's 53% are in the lowest level of poverty, right, these students, right? And they said, we're told all the time about what we need to remediate. We're told all the time about the things we're not good at, and you're going to try to help us fix those things. And now you're telling us that we need to basically do this kindergarten-type teamwork stuff. And from this top-down approach and the way that it was presented, some of the students, a number of the students, felt as though this was condescending and potentially patronizing, right? At the same time, many of the students we found, when we offered them the positive reinforcement through some of these things, they lit up. Like, this makes the difference. This is how, and so we learned something from this, right? That this particular population of folks we were working with had been told a lot of things about what they weren't good at, hadn't been told many things that they were good at. And not only do we need to, in the coaching component, help them see themselves that way and do the cheerleading, but in the education and training delivery, to be very cognizant that these individuals have different perspectives than perhaps we brought to the table as we designed it and implemented it. And so that's very important. And be willing to say, you know what, you're right. We're going to change the way that we did that. It was a risk to do that program. It was a risk to offer it the way that it was offered, but it was a risk that was worth taking because now it's a better program. And there were lots of learning that came out of it. So I think both of those things about being bold and being positive are really, very important.
thank you.
I'd like to also mention, Melissa, first of all, congratulations on the work that you're doing. That sort of tactical approach to an interview, that a lot of people think, well, everyone knows how to do that. No, those are skills that you have to learn. That's really hard stuff. And I just think that that's, and a lot of folks just don't get that. One of the things that Phil and I have been working on is just lifting up this idea of career navigation as essential skills. And everybody who's successful, they do it. That's how they got there. They've mastered these skills. So it's really important stuff. And Phil, I was stung when we got that response back from our work with the Stride Center. But I'll tell you, these 5 truths of career success, I personally have been working on the relationship management piece. That's sort of truth number 3 that I've been sort of working on myself, just figuring out how I can make better connections with people that are longer. And if you look at our report, it's Bridge to Career Success. You can Google it and find it, just Bridge to Career Success at Nova. There's in the back, there's a lot of tactical anecdotes from Silicon Valley professionals saying, this is how I do it. This is how I make sure that when I meet someone, I follow up with them, they remember me. People are really thinking about this. They're not just all thinking about algorithms out there. They're thinking about this sort of thing. So I think that's great that you're really lifting up that practice.
Thank you. Now, Sarah, from your perspective, as you know, with JP Morgan Chase, you guys do a lot of work around the country. What are some programs that you have seen that are being successful in particularly engaging communities of color?
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm really excited about that I mentioned initially is this idea of apprenticeship as a way to build a strong and diverse tech talent pipeline. And so, you know, we see a number of examples of this. So apprenticeship is one of those, like, apprenticeship, you think of it and you're like, well, okay, you use an apprenticeship to become a plumber or do something in the building and construction trades. Actually, it's just kind of a model that incorporates classroom-based learning and on-the-job training. So it's actually a really great fit for a lot of tech professions that really rely on work experience and learning on the job and understanding that. So for example, in St. Louis, we have a partner, LaunchCode, that has developed apprenticeships in technology with, you know, and they work with a number of companies around there. And basically, you know, the model is they do this kind of initial boot camp to get people up to speed on some of the basics, and then they go into an apprenticeship at a company where they are employed and they are working alongside a mentor, a more experienced mentor, using this sort of paired coding model of an apprenticeship. And it's one of those things where, you know, the model just works kind of very well for a lot of roles in this industry. We see a similar sort of model being used up in Vermont, actually, with Vermont High Tech, where they trained, you know, hundreds of software developers for Burlington-based dealer.com starting, you know, about 10 years ago. And many of those people actually rose from being apprentices in the company to being partners at the company. So you see some really great examples where you've been able to use that kind of structured form of an apprenticeship to really prepare people for some of these careers.
That's wonderful, thank you. Now, one of the things that comes to mind for me is the very vibrant startup community that we have here in Boston. And I wonder, what's the most effective way for a small business to kick off a workforce development, training, shadowing program? How do you do that when you're a small company, you've got 10, 15 folks, maybe you're VC backed, you've got very defined targets that you have to meet? Any suggestions on how to go about that?
It's a great target, right? Because small businesses probably don't have the resources to do as much of the workforce development activity and recruitment as the larger companies do. So that's really the opportunity to partner with existing organizations and you know, and looking out at the crowd as I was saying some things about all things workforce development isn't doing right. I'm looking at all these people who I've seen who are doing it really well. So I think that's important. There are models exist. There are companies that are doing many of the things that we talked about that are critical. So I think some of it is creating an opportunity for that synergy. One of the challenges that we have, right, is that we can be fairly competitive here. And so we noticed that, you know, maybe 10 years ago, Boston IT and tech, people were holding their cards much more close to their chest than they were in Silicon Valley. That's actually changed somewhat. So that unfortunately means that everybody's holding their cards close to their chest. But it does require you basically taking a leap of faith saying, I'm going to put some effort into a program, and that person may select another company other than mine. But we kind of have to think about this as building a pipeline. So I would say there has to be some sort of, in addition to the entrepreneurial spirit, recognizing that in a global competition for talent and in a global competition for resources, if we can think regionally, if we can think about what this city and this state bring and kind of be a little bit more collaborative, I think that would go a long way.
Thank you.
I think partnerships are key. I mean, that's what we're here for in the workforce development community, and I would say the whole workforce preparation system. The challenge we have are finding those companies. One of the things in Silicon Valley is everyone wants to work with Google, Facebook, and LinkedIn, right? I mean, everybody, oh, we'd love to have a partnership with them. And they're great companies, but they're not the companies who really feel, frankly, that they need us, right? We've heard at Google and other places, they have a pipeline to Stanford, and that's something that's really important to them. Well, we're not going to be able to work with them, but it's a very rich, I'm sure here too, Silicon Valley is a very rich tech ecosystem. There are more than a few companies there. There's lots of folks doing stuff. One of the things we just need to do a better job of trying to find them and the ones who really want to work with us, and we can leverage, I mean, it's their tax dollars at work, right? Leverage the system, because we're ready to help.
And I think an important piece, just to add to that, is not only engage them, but frankly, recognize them. Those companies that are investing in the pipeline, I think that they should be recognized for for what they're doing. Melissa?
Well, I have two things to say now. So, because you had a really great comment there. And we did actually award Akamai at the Mass Technology Leadership Council Awards Gala just this past Wednesday. We gave them an award, the Mosaic Award, for their contributions for thinking very strategically about diversity and inclusion. So you're absolutely right. Acknowledgement is extremely important on this topic. So yes, that's very important. And then when we think about like how does the startup community play a role in this, the reason for why I started the Black Tech Boston meetup was because I was a part of that 1%. I was a part of the 1% where I was going to work every day at Google, and I was like, I only know myself, the janitor, like we're cool, the guy at the cafe, and it was fine. And I felt like, this is exactly how I felt. So while I was there, I was just like, oh my gosh, are there other Black people that work at other companies at like Microsoft and Twitter? And I had no idea. So when I started the meetup, I thought, okay, well, let's just kind of put it out there, let's see what happens. And I really thought like the meetup would be myself, my mom, and my sister all just like hanging out and having pizza. And as it started to grow, I was really surprised and very, very humbled to see that so many people were interested in it. When it got to 40, I was like, all right, cool, they can come to my office. I think we can all fit. And then when it got to 100, I was like, holy smokes, like they definitely can't fit here. So I called my colleagues at Google and asked them like, hey, like I started this meetup thing, it's kind of taken off, and they were more than happy to open their doors. So the way that I see the startup community being able to do that is, or being able to play a part, is by opening their doors. So our Black Tech Boston meetup group goes around to different tech companies, and the idea is that many of our members are coming from Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, and crossing the river. I know it seems so far away, but it's only 4 miles, I swear. And they come right across the river, and we talk about business and technology, because that business acumen is so important during the interview process, and it really takes a long time for someone who's new to it to actually learn all of those components. So we talk about business, and then we talk about technology. I think so many of our attendees see these big tech companies and they're like, oh my gosh, Google's cool. But Google actually has thousands of products that they have that sustains this billion-dollar organization. So by having this very focused conversation about how does this one business line make money and how the heck did you create it, it makes it for a very meaningful conversation. So it's been really great to see our meetup group now grow to over 600 members. Our meetups are now booked until 2017, and it's because people are interested and employers are looking for solutions for this problem.
And the mention of meetups are such an important resource. One of the things we do at Nova, occasionally people will come to me and say, okay, well, what's the latest thing in tech? What should I be training in? And I'm very quickly to say, I have no idea. Please don't ask me, because if I knew last week, it's changed next week.
Yeah, that's right.
So the thing is, but one of the things we do tell them is you need to go to a place where you can get a source of labor market intelligence, real time, like what's happening this week, and how to access training opportunities and other things like that. I think meetup groups are incredible. And I will say one of the things that we talk about is how do you navigate a meetup group? It's a tough place. I'm an introvert. It's a very tough place for introverts. And I had to go a few times to come up with my introvert strategy for sort of surviving that. So that's all critical. I mean, all of that stuff that's the place to really check in with.
Thank you. Now, from a digital literacy perspective, what role does that play in building the talent pipeline?
Luther, do you want to talk about what your board member said about digital literacy? You know, the board dialogue over the language. Remember that conversation? There was a board member and said, "Is this really fair? Should we really be expecting people to have this digital literacy? You know, so many people don't have computers, and you know, how do we deal with this, basically?" And the board kind of split a little bit, right, as they're having this conversation, because all of the tech companies were like, well, then that person has no hope in Silicon Valley, right? I mean, that digital literacy is, you know, kids should be learning that as they learn their letters and numbers, right? This is literacy. It's not just digital literacy. And what's interesting is a lot of the coding programs that are getting implemented into elementary schools are actually teaching very much the same kind of coding that we're teaching at boot camps in many places. And so this tells me something, right? It's a market sign to me, right? Which says this is supposed to be a really important skill. We're spending lots of money on coding academies, and we're also teaching it to third graders. This is going to become obsolete very fast. This is going to be something where coding becomes something that everyone knows, like desktop publishing, right? If you're a good admin, you know how to do desktop publishing now, right? Because the programs have gotten better. It's been embedded in that kind of training. So coding is a language. It's like learning Spanish, right? If you don't know business Spanish, what are you going to do with it? If you don't solve problems with it, what are you going to do with it? So coding academies, no, it's good. I'm not saying it's a problem. I'm just saying we have to stop thinking of it as, oh, good, we need coders. Let's do coding academies, then everyone will be fine. That skill will be obsolete in a couple of years, right? As a standalone. It'll still be important in what you're doing, but this is the whole thing about building this, you know, digital literacy is another one. Building a toolbox that you can bring with you to solve novel problems. That's what this digital economy requires. It's the intersection of the human and digital age, especially in higher cost places like Boston. You need to have multiple skill sets, multiple tools in the box. So, and literacy is one of them.
So along those same lines, as we think about disadvantaged communities and the types of enrichment programs and activities that are available to them, what do we need to do from an investment perspective in order to provide programs that develop critical thinking and problem-solving skills?
Well, we have to start early on in the pipeline, like successful folks do. They start early on. We need to make sure that we can apply that formula to everyone. Phil mentioned on digital literacy, it's critical, it's foundational. The Silicon Valley Education Foundation has had a program to help to make sure that kids can get through Algebra 1 in 8th grade, because that's kind of a tipping point, is whether they can do it or not. We've been doing some work trying to connect high school students with careers in advanced transportation, like self-driving cars. And we had a summer workshop for kids, which was my best week ever in workforce development. Lots of fun. And there was a student there, a mechanical engineering student from San Jose State University, and he said, if you are interested in cars and you love cars and you want to do this as a career, there's 3 things you need to know: physics, chemistry, calculus. Now, I've gotten feedback from people saying, well, Luther, isn't that kind of elitist? I mean, not everyone can be an engineer. And my comment is, if we in the workforce preparation system set a really low bar and really low expectations, how can we expect our students and job seekers to soar and be the fuel for this economy? We have to raise our game.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
And I think that totally makes sense, focusing on the early part of the pipeline, but let's not forget about this generation where I think I still fall into that, like the millennial generation, where like we all just graduated. I graduated in 2010 from UMass Amherst, and I graduated in the middle of a recession. Like there are these folks that graduated not too long ago that are still trying to figure out, like, how do I navigate this career? So many of our conversations, like through the Akamai program, were people that were, I graduated, I went into this field, I don't really like it that much, I see tech is going in a really great direction. How can I play a part? And I think Akamai is one solution, but let's not forget about these adults that are here and the more senior adults as well, who are seeing that tech is taking over their jobs. They're now being replaced in traditional roles as like a cashier or even a toll person. Like they're losing their jobs every day, and no one's paying attention to the fact that like they're unemployed. They're also a part of this workforce, and they also will have to be retrained in order for them to find really great job opportunities. So I think we have to, as much as we inspire the next generation, be very thoughtful about the talent pool that we have right now, who's very much so in need of really high-paying and well-paying jobs.
Yeah, and I think this gets back to something that Phil talked about in his opening remarks, which is, if we're moving away from these more strictly defined occupations, which I think we are increasingly, and really we want to be in an economy where we're constantly innovating and we're constantly increasing productivity and growing the economy and increasing our standard of living. And what that means is that there's going to be increasing job churn. So technologies will become obsolete. We have to learn new things. And what this says to me is that we can't view the education and the training system and the labor market as two separate entities with one connection point, right? So people need to be able to continue to move back and forth between education and training and the labor market. And employers really need to figure out how to offer on-the-job learning and on-the-job training, particularly for those lower and middle skill workers, so that we do have a workforce that is constantly adapting and learning and succeeding in the changing economy.
And so I would just add two very quick things. One is we test what matters, and what matters is what we test. Okay? So if you want to know how we build critical thinking and problem solving, then standardized tests do not do a good job of measuring that. Okay? So that's the first problem. They do a good job maybe with other things. I'm not going to have that discussion now, but I know that they do not do a good job with critical thinking. And every kid by 3rd grade, the first question they have, is this on the test? And if the answer is no, we know at 8 years old it doesn't matter. So you can blab all you want about how important something is. If you're not building it into your assessment of that person, getting feedback and good job or bad job based on that skill, they know it is not as important to you. So now there's a lot of folks in the Department of Labor funded programs and everything else. This is really hard stuff to get squeaked through Department of Labor funding. This does not match ETA guidelines, right? Talking about generally training people in critical thinking and problem solving, good luck, okay? But that does get back to the earlier policy question. It is totally misaligned with the needs of the 21st century economy. We have a production-based incentive system for a manufacturing economy that largely does not exist from a talent perspective. So that's one kind of key framing. Make those assessments make sense. And then second, very briefly, I would say, in order to do this young, right, again, you need to link this to opportunity. People who come from resource-poor communities are looking for ways to get into resources. And so we heard some early ones, I want to go into IT because people can make a lot of money in IT. Not the best guidance to give people, right? Make sure they actually like a world of creative destruction, because IT is rapidly changing and requires curiosity. It might not be for them, right? Maybe they'd be happier in a career that's more linear or that has more of some other thing. So I think model what you do after Fortune 500 companies and Ivy League universities in terms of how they treat talent, and you'll be off to a good start.
Thank you for that.
Can I add
So
one
I don't know if we want to open it up to the panel. Does anyone out, not to the panel, I'm sorry, anybody in the audience have any questions?
We have about 15 minutes for questions, and I reiterate the word questions. There'll be lots of networking time to talk with our panelists afterwards, so I just want to make sure you're asking questions.
Hi there. It's great. The enterprise culture is really thinking very hard about an inclusive workforce and for tech professionals. That's great. What about tech professionals in the nonprofit sector? Please give us your thoughts.
Well, it shows that, I mean, there's this idea of it's not all Google or Facebook. There are broad opportunities and people who have an interest, and to Phil's point, it's all about passion, right? If you don't have the passion, we don't want you in the field. So if you have an interest in changing the world and you have tech skills, we definitely want to do that. The challenge is, and this is one of the things that we have to do in the workforce system, a better job of just clarity, what are the opportunities available? Because young people aren't going to know what opportunities are out there. So we have to do a better job of getting that out there to the world.
And we did get some examples in the Bay Area of people who are going through training programs, were transitioning their careers, were in education programs, were having trouble getting the first job, and were able to be connected to nonprofits who had more discrete project-based tasks. Like, we need you to develop a database for us that works. Well, not only does that provide a great benefit to the nonprofit, it's a volunteer opportunity so the person doesn't immediately get paid. But then when they go in that interview and they say, tell us about a real world solution, they said, do you know this nonprofit? That database, we can go to it now, you can see how they're querying it, and this is how I built it and solved their problem. So maybe bringing together the nonprofit community, the education and training providers, and saying, hey, if what we really need is experience, maybe it's not going to be a direct hire opportunity, maybe it's not going to be a formal internship or apprenticeship program, but almost a guild project model that allows for that kind of activity.
And I'd also say that when we think about, or when I talk to millennials now that are coming into the workforce, they are very much so looking for mission-driven work. So it's just figuring out like what are the right opportunities. We've had several conversations with candidates that said like, yeah, Akamai sounds cool, or like, you know, some of our bigger corporate clients, they sound cool, but I want to work with something that has meaning. And I think they would very much so be open to those job opportunities, but we have to kind of find the right way for them to be able to have that right entry point. So I think you're right.
Also, please let us know who you're with and who you are.
Hi, I'm Nancy Snyder from Commonwealth Corporation. I actually have two questions, but they'll be quick. The first is, what's the role that staffing agencies or contingent workforce partners play in hiring in the IT field, particularly for entry-level jobs? And my second is, we hear a lot about badging. Is badging meaningful in the IT field if you don't have a college diploma?
Can you define badging? Sorry.
So badging is
That's
like,
a bad sign.
right. I guess so. You've answered the
I think the
question.
answer.
It's kind of competency-based education where you can demonstrate mastery of a
Sure.
skill and you get
Okay.
a badge in recognition of that.
Oh, I understand now. Okay, got it. So, well, so for my other staffing partners, I mean, we have to think about this. Like, we get a job order from, and I'm going to be very transparent, we get a job order from one of our clients. We're looking to find that talent. So we're very much so, I think many staffing agencies also struggling to find this talent. We are often having to do a very hard recruit for our clients. And what they end up seeing is that, one, it takes a long time for us to find tech talent. Why? Because they're already employed. Less than 2% of software engineers are unemployed. So they're not like sitting at home having a beer waiting for me to call them. They're already at work. I'm trying to find their work email, trying to get through it. So staffing agencies are just the conduit for making this happen, and they're happy to play their part, but they're all struggling with this talent and supply. And when it comes to badges, the badges are helpful. Having the certifications are certainly helpful because that's what an employer is looking for. So yes, I do think that certifications are helpful. It shows your curiosity. It shows your willingness to go above and beyond, that you went to school, that's great, but what are you truly passionate about? And those badges do certainly help.
Yeah. And I would add to that not only do you have certifications as part of official programs, but then you've got a lot of other online resources that non-traditional students can take advantage of. For example, Khan Academy is a phenomenal resource. And beyond that, you then have other online programs available from MIT and Harvard, which again are free, that allow you to demonstrate a certain skill set on a resume prior to potentially getting an interview, and may be the difference on whether or not you get called in or not.
Yeah, I would just push back a little on the how employers view these badging and sub-BA credentials and certificates, right? So there is not yet a widely recognized and accepted system of sub-BA credentials in technology occupations that employers value. And so what we saw in some of our research is things like some of these coding boot camps are really relying less on certificates and credentials and more on just the reputation of the boot camp alone and their relationships with employers to place candidates and demonstrate their skills. And two, they will be having the participants build portfolios to demonstrate their skills.
That's
so
right.
I haven't seen yet that there are really good sub-BA credential system in many tech occupations yet that employers really value. I think that's one thing that employers should be doing, though, is really stepping up to identify what their skills needs are and what sort of credentials and certificates at the sub-BA level would demonstrate to them that a candidate has the right skills.
You know, just adding to that for 1 minute, as an employer, I've never been very interested in the certificates that people bring. As a matter of fact, the greater the list, the more skeptical we become. It's about, I'm so pleased to hear the work that you're doing about the interaction and what happens when the person comes in to talk to you about the experience, even if it was in their first year, if it was working at a nonprofit, but how they described what they were out to do, what steps they took personally, not the team, but what they took and what they did to work through the problem. I mean, that's really what gets somebody the job. And then just one more on there, in terms of building the career out, we talk about what it takes to get somebody in the door or, help them get in the door or for me to pull them in the door. But once they're in, our obligation is to build, help them build a career in a broad sense, to your point, not in that I going up to master, but, rotational programs. We should encourage the people that you're helping to employ these candidates to create rotational programs that give, broad exposure in a short amount of time because of the changing, how fast technology is changing.
Hi, my name is Jim Munns. I'm Vice President of Innovation at eResearch Technology, and I'm a hiring manager. And one of where my question comes in, it kind of ties on to the agency model. So I work to try and hire people and bring people in, and based upon the ecosystem that's developed, apologize for the post, based upon the ecosystem that's developed around technology over the last 20 years, going back to the .com era and the agency model that grew up around that, what work is being done to help educate those agency models? Because what I find is that the resources that are charged with hiring and recruiting for me or reaching out and finding resumes, they're going through specific channels. And a lot of time those channels are these agencies that grew up around the .com era, so they start looking for resumes and candidates in the same place they looked at them 10 years ago. And so I start seeing the same candidates coming through the pipeline, and that's where the start of the problem happens. If I don't see a resume for somebody that's different, then I can't hire them.
Exactly.
I mean, I think part of what you'll find, in order for you to find success, I would say you'll need to tap into some private networks, if you will. You're going to have to connect with folks that have, taken the time to build relationships that go beyond your typical Dice.com and Monster.com and whatever resume database that they're looking for. Because otherwise, again, particularly when you're looking for employees in the IT field whom most certainly are not, quote unquote, in need of a job because of their past experience. And then I think beyond that, as it relates to entry level, I think that's where non-traditional training programs come in, that they can allow you to tap into that pipeline.
I was thinking this whole talent question and where you find talent. When it comes to finding sports talent, we're really good at doing that. You could go to the poorest county in the country, and if there's a 6'4", 235-pound linebacker who runs a 4.55 40, somebody's going to find that individual, right? But when it comes to our communities of color, poor communities, we don't even look. So just as in sports programs, AAU programs tend to be talent scouts for telling me who's there. I think if companies are serious, for example, in hiring diverse talent, I think you would really be tied in with historically black colleges and universities. Because, say, in Mississippi, how would we know there's talent there, right? We know there's fuel there for the economy. How would you find that, folks? It seems like you'd want to have a connection with Jackson State University. I mean, it's just looking in new sources and folks who know the territory.
Yep, absolutely. Wait, to add on to that, I think you're absolutely right. So from my experience, I know many of my employers that recruit at Harvard and MIT. I get that. That's why we don't recruit there and you don't see us on site. We go to the Bunker Hill community colleges, the Roxbury community colleges. We think about those coding boot camps because that's where our candidates have access to opportunities. So when employers or hiring managers are going through that process of looking for diverse talent, what I encourage them to do and what the role of the Tech Connection is to augment your candidate pool. Our goal is so that you look at a diverse slate of candidates before you make a decision. So our role here is to help the recruiting team. I know it's extremely difficult to look for diversity candidates when you have 50 job recs that are for one recruiter and she has 10 hiring managers that she has to work with. I get that. That's why we created the Tech Connection as a solution to that. Look at a diverse slate of candidates before you make your decision. And I've seen some employers actually hold their hiring managers and the recruiters to this idea where they will not move forward with interviewing until they have a diverse slate of candidates to look at.
Thank you. I'm Peggy Wiesenberg. I'm an Access to Justice Fellow working with the grassroots parent group Quality Education for Every Student in Boston. And I have two questions which sort of segue into the last two comments. Luther Jackson mentioned economic patriotism, and I just recently saw a preview of the movie Snowden, which I think opens in Boston tonight, and I'm wondering what you all or we all are doing to build democratic values. Some consider, Snowden embracing, and some, a traitor. But I think you'll see in the movie mentorship. You'll see a relationship with him and another black techie. But I think it's an issue that we all need to face. So I'd like to know your opinions. And the other question is, what are you and we doing to, once you've recruited and developed some of the talent and changed some of the education system, but building a pipeline and encouraging, these new proficient workers in tech and education to become our diverse pool of education leaders for K-12 schools that may have lower pay, less prestige. But I know two girls from my high school went to MIT. One was the valedictorian who became a linguistics professor at an inner city school, university, but the other became a principal of the McKinley School for very high needs, special needs, Black and Latino and poor white kids in Boston.
Well, I know there are tech, in Silicon Valley, there are special tech to education programs, which are really important. Another group we work with is Yes We Code, which is a nonprofit started by Van Jones and Prince. And they are helping to get folks of color in through coding academies. And they have, one of the people who spoke there is a very successful tech person who I saw at one of their forums, who's now teaching in the Oakland school system. Very powerful. I mean, you do have the monetary issues and everything else, but that's a critical pipeline. And I would hope that those programs get more visibility. They got the tech to education pipeline.
We have time for three more questions, one up front, one back here, and one over here.
I have a quick question for Judson's Downton Abbey, NFL, NBA, Luther.
What a great title, Luther.
Actually, Luther, I've written down 15 slogans from the I want to see how you got it down to 5. My name is Belden Daniels. My firm is Economic Innovation International. We work around the globe on innovation issues. My principal partner is a woman in Los Angeles. Her company is fully a rainbow. It is African American, male and female, Hispanic, male and female, Asian everything. And I did not do that in Boston. In my judgment, we have a Harvard, MIT, white boy problem. And I suspect there may also be a Silicon Valley, Stanford problem. But we have to do better. She's done better. We also work closely in the Bay Area, and I see a lot of much more diversity there in the area of innovation than I see here. I'm interested in your observation.
I talked about this idea of coalition of the willing, of people we'll work with. One school that we work with that's been very willing to work with us is San Jose State University. And they have a lot of students, a great engineering program. They have a lot of students who are first in their family to go to college. Navigating a state university that's very impacted economically is very hard to get through San Jose State. Often they may be the only person in the family who speaks English. When you can get an engineer who's gone through that, who's had to navigate and figure stuff out. When I went to school, I did not have to figure stuff out. My parents told me what to do. People who can do that, the idea who are resourceful and resilient, those are qualities that companies are looking for. I've heard anecdotally that a number of Silicon Valley companies say, we want San Jose State University students. Those are the type of people we want. So those backgrounds, it's another issue about diversity. People who have had to figure it out, who didn't have the pathway set for them, those are folks you're looking for. I think we have to do more to kind of just put those values on the table and say that's what companies are looking for. Resourceful, resilient, and innovative. I would put those together.
And I totally support that. I think having that conversation at all levels of the organization is the key thing, not only from a leadership perspective, but also from a line manager, and making sure that they're on board.
I also think it's fair to say that we should have a real and honest race dialogue again in Boston. I think that needs to happen. I have a colleague who is an associate with me at a big law firm. She left Boston and moved to Washington, D.C. because she didn't like the way people looked at her because she was a well-dressed African-American woman on the T. That's real, guys. That is real. Absolutely. People feel that way in Boston. And if we want to keep pretending that it's just socioeconomic status, or if we just want to keep pretending that the issue is not here, it will continue to be that way for my children and my grandchildren in this city. I think we've come a long way. I think we can come a lot further. So we do need to be intentional about it if we want it to change. I think it's a great point.
And also to add to what you're saying, Luther, like I think you're absolutely right. Like we do need to talk about race, and we do need to have these conversations. And when we think about what it's like to be first generation, which I am, what it's like to be the first one to go to college for your family, like which I am, and the first one to ever work at a Fortune 500 company, which I am, and the first one to ever start a business, which I am. Like all of these check boxes happen in my life, and I think for me, like I didn't realize that being resilient was an important factor to an employer at all. Like I assumed that I had to work 2 jobs because that's what I saw my parents do, and it wasn't until I went and I worked at Sample 6, my manager said, "Why are you working 2 jobs?" And I was like, "I don't know. I thought that's what everybody in America does." And he was like, "You have a really great job here. Like you don't have to do that anymore." And it was something that I had done because I assumed that this is how you have to make your way through it. And through those experiences, it helped me realize, like, oh, I kind of am like doing a lot. Like, do I need to do this all the time? I am resilient. I am really smart. I do have really great ideas. And through those work experiences, it helped me to understand how employers value that, but I didn't make the connection that because I was doing all this really great work over here, that this was actually important to my employer. So a lot of these conversations are extremely essential for candidates to understand the value that they bring, even though like working 2 jobs, most people are like ashamed to say it, right? It's like, you know, I got to pay my bills. I have to figure out how I can pay my school loans. Like you're very ashamed to bring this up, but actually it's showing you a lot of leadership development and a lot of skills that employers value. So when
and I was going to say on top of that is training, you know, finding a way to present that in a way that the employer sees it. Because, you know, a hiring manager might hear, okay, great, worked 2 jobs, so did I, right? But, you know, or maybe I didn't or whatever. So finding a way to tell the story around that resiliency in a way that, 1, somebody's proud to send that message, and 2, it's packaged in a way that could be digested and understood for what are those character types. You know, I've heard a lot today about Coders Inc. and Coders this and Coders that. As a hiring manager for years in this area, I don't have issue finding somebody who knows C# or knows how to write web pages because they went and they got the certification. I bring them into the organization and they do good. They can create any code and make the widgets that we need. But the moment they want upward mobility, they hit a wall because they don't have the social capability, how to manage the environment and have the conversations and how to rightly govern without blowing themselves up. And then they kind of stay in the closet coding and wonder why they're not moving up. So I think we have to address that as well. And a lot of the skills that we're talking about here are those, and they need the right packaging and kind of nurturing to grow the career.
And I think you're right.
Thank you.
It comes down to those leadership skills. So most recently, we just created a software platform that we're going to leverage for our enterprise clients called Power Up. And Power Up helps us to work with our candidates for them to, one, do a personality assessment to figure out their strengths, two, to take a technical assessment so they can see where they lie in the marketplace. It also gives them access to classes so they can remediate their technical skills. And lastly, they have to report their projects that they've worked on. So we walk them through the same process that we have on conversations with our candidates. They have to also highlight the projects that they've already done beforehand. So right now we're looking for pilot partners, pilot employers that will be willing to try out our software platform. So if you are an employer who's interested in seeing change actually happen on this topic, feel free to reach out. I'd love to talk to you more.
Well, with that,
Time here.
So with that, I'd like to thank our panel. Thank you very much.
Just one more quick round of applause for our panel. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. As some next steps, excuse me. We just want to close out. There's clearly a lot of energy and there's much more to talk about. And so that's why we've scheduled this as the first in a series of 3. There are, just to borrow a phrase from Luther and maybe George Bush, but Mary Beth and I are looking to form the Coalition of the Willing. And so we will be, we welcome feedback and we want to connect with you and get organized and start taking action on many of the great ideas that were suggested today. So, Meredith, did you want to add anything? No? Okay, awesome. Thank you very much. We hope to see you soon.